The rain came in sideways that afternoon, and I watched a man in a wheelchair get rolled into it and left there like a chair somebody meant to take inside and forgot. I was 12 feet away, posted at the South Sentry box on the Eastgate forecourt, and there is nothing in our standing orders for that. There is a procedure for an intruder. There is a procedure for a fainting tourist, for a dog off its lead, for a man who climbs the railing. There is no procedure for the slow, deliberate cruelty of a person walking away from someone who cannot follow. His name, I would learn within the hour, was Mr. Alder. I did not know it then. I knew only that he was old, that his coat was the wrong kind for the weather, and that the woman who had wheeled him up to the gilded railing of the Hartmore Palace forecourt had just turned her collar up and started walking back toward the visitors' lane without him. I am a sentry of the King's Guard at Hartmore. That is the fictional house I serve, an invented crown in an invented country, and I tell you that plainly because the man I am about to describe is real to me in every way that matters, even if his palace never appeared on any map you could buy. My name is Sergeant Reese Calloway. The guard this story belongs to is not me. It is Trooper Bram Whitlock, who stood the north box that day, 8 strides across the cobbles from where I stood, and who did the thing I have turned over in my mind 1,000 times since. I should explain what we are, before I explain what he did, because if you do not understand the cage we stand in, you will not understand the size of stepping out of it. A sentry on the forecourt does not move. That is the whole art of it. We hold the brace heels together, rifle at the order chin level, eyes fixed on a point above the crowd for 2 hours at a stretch, and the discipline is not for show, though the tourists treat it as show. It is the visible promise that this gate is held by men who will not be moved by weather, by insult, by fear, by anything. A boy will lean in and shout in your ear to make you blink. A woman will stand at your shoulder for 10 minutes pulling faces for a camera. Rain runs off the bearskin and down your collar, and you do not so much as roll a shoulder against it. You learn to swallow the urge to react the way you learn to swallow anything, slowly, completely, until the urge stops coming. Whitlock was the best of us at it, 2 years younger than me and twice as still. There was a stillness in that man that the rest of us only performed. He seemed to actually possess it, the way some men possess a low voice or large hands as a fact of the body. The recruits called him the statue without irony. I had seen a pigeon land on his rifle and sit there preening for the length of a changeover, and Whitlock had not so much as tightened his jaw. So when I tell you what he did, understand that it cost him more than it would have cost any of us. The stiller a man is, the further he has to come to move. The afternoon had been ordinary, gray since dawn, the kind of low ceiling that promises rain and then makes you wait for it. A thin crowd at the railings, a school group in matching caps, a cluster of tourists with phones, an elderly couple sharing one umbrella. The changing was an hour off. I had counted in the bored arithmetic of the post that we had perhaps 40 minutes of dry left. We had 30. The first drops came fat and slow, ticking off the cobbles, and the crowd did the thing crowds do, a ripple of opened umbrellas, a hurry toward the colonnade where the overhang offered shelter. And in that small commotion the woman wheeled Mr. Alder up to the railing. I noticed her because she was moving against the current. Everyone else was drifting toward cover. She was driving the chair straight at the open forecourt, toward the rope line where the public is allowed to stand, and she had the brisk, put-upon look of a person discharging a chore she resented. She parked him at the rope. She set the brake with her foot. I heard the snap of it even over the rising rain. She bent and said something close to his ear, 2 words, maybe 3, and she did not wait for an answer. Then she walked away. I watched her go the whole length of the lane, expecting her at every step to turn, to be fetching something, to be going for the car so she could bring it round. People left things at the rope all the time and came back. I gave her the benefit of every doubt I had. She reached the far archway, put her phone to her ear, and turned left out of sight toward the public car park, and she did not look back once. And Mr. Alder sat at the rope in the rain. He had a tartan blanket over his knees that was already darkening with water. His hands were folded on top of it. He wore a flat cap and a thin gray coat and a tie in the rain, which told me he had dressed for this, that wherever he thought he was going he had thought it worth a tie. The rain came harder. It ran off the brim of his cap in a little stream. He did not call out. He did not wave anyone down. He simply sat, very upright, the way men of a certain age sit when they have decided that complaining is beneath them, and he looked up at the palace through the downpour as though it were the thing he had come a long way to see. I felt the wrongness of it land in my chest like a dropped weight. Every instinct I had built over 6 years on that forecourt was screaming two things at once, and they could not both be obeyed. Hold your post. Help that man. The post does not move. The man is freezing in the rain. Hold the brace. He is alone. Eyes front. He is alone and no one is coming. I want to be honest about the next part, because it is the part that shames me a little even now. I did not move. I told myself the things you tell yourself, that the rope marshals would see him, that the woman would come back, that it was not my decision to make, that a sentry who breaks his brace for a wet visitor invites every visitor to test him, that the discipline only means something if it holds without exception, and an old man in the rain was, God help me, an exception. I stood my brace and I held my eyes front, and I let the reason stack up in my mind like sandbags against the thing I knew I ought to do. 8 strides away, Trooper Whitlock was doing the same arithmetic. I could not see his face, we both faced front, out toward the crowd, but I could feel him the way you feel the other man on a 2-man post, a sort of pressure at the edge of attention. And I felt in the long minute that followed, that pressure change. The rain found its full strength. It came down in ropes now, hammering the cobbles, turning the forecourt to a sheet of moving water, and the last of the dry weather crowd broke and ran for the colonnade, and the rope line emptied, and Mr. Alder sat in the middle of all that abandoned space, a small, dark, upright shape going slowly invisible behind the rain. And then I heard from the north box, the one sound a forecourt sentry is never, ever supposed to make. I heard Whitlock's boot come down out of the brace. It is a particular sound that. A sentry at the order stands with his heels together and his weight settled, and the boots are silent because nothing in them moves. When a man steps off, the iron-shod heel strikes the wet cobble with a crack like a small shot, and every head within 30 feet turns to find it. Heads turned now. The school group at the colonnade, the tourists under the overhang, a marshal in a yellow coat by the archway, all of them looked, because in that place a moving guardsman is the most arresting thing there is. I broke my own eyes front to look. I could not help it. Whitlock had come out of his box. He was crossing the open forecourt at the long march, not running, never running, but at the full ceremonial stride, heel and toe through 2 inches of standing water, the rifle still at the slope on his shoulder, the rain sheeting off the bearskin and down the red wool of his tunic, so that it had gone nearly black across the shoulders. He did not look left or right. He went straight as a ruled line for the small, dark shape at the rope. My first thought, I am ashamed to say, was not for Mr. Alder. My first thought was, he has thrown it away. 6 years I had stood beside men who would sooner take a slap across the face than break the brace for a heckler. And here was the stillest of all of them walking off his post in front of 40 witnesses and a dozen phones. And I thought, the way you think when you are young and frightened of the wrong things, he has just ended his service over a stranger. Then Whitlock reached the chair, and I stopped thinking about his service. He did not crouch the way you or I would crouch in a hurry, all knees and apology. He came to a halt at the old man's side, and he went down on one knee on the flooded cobbles, the slow, square, deliberate descent of the formal kneel, the kind a guardsman makes at a casket, and he brought himself down to the level of Mr. Alder's face, so the old man would not have to crane his neck up into the rain. The blanket on his knee went dark with water the instant it touched the ground. He did not seem to notice. He set the rifle butt down against his shoulder, and his thigh so it stayed clear of the wet, all in one motion, the discipline still running underneath him even as he broke every rule it had built. And then he leaned in and said something to the old man that I was too far away to hear. Whatever it was, Mr. Alder's hands came unfolded. I've replayed that small thing more than any other. The old man had been sitting with his hands clasped on the soaked blanket, that braced and patient stillness of a person who has decided to endure. And when Whitlock spoke to him, his hands came apart and one of them rose and gripped the young guardsman's forearm, gripped the wet red wool, and held on. Not a wave for help, a hold. The grip of a man who has been alone in a great deal of rain and has just been found. That was when I moved. I want that on the record too because it matters to me. I did not move first. I am not the hero of this. I moved second, after Whitlock had already paid the price of moving, when the cost was halved by his having gone first, and I have made a private peace with being the second man, but I will not dress it up as more than it was. I came off the south box at the march, crossed the forecourt the way he had, and I reached them as Whitlock was unbuckling his own greatcoat at the throat. "Sergeant," he said, not turning his head, his voice flat and low and entirely level as though we were discussing a roster. "His blanket's through. I'm putting my coat over him. I'll answer for the post." "You'll answer for nothing," I said. "We'll answer for it together. Get him out of this." Up close, Mr. Alder was worse than he had looked from the box. His lips had gone a bad color, and his whole frame was shaking in long, slow waves he could not stop, and the upright dignity I had read from across the forecourt was not strength at all. It was the rigidity of a man too cold to slump. His eyes were clear, though, clear and pale and fixed on Whitlock's face with a kind of disbelief. "You're getting wet," the old man said. His teeth were going. "Son, you'll get in trouble. Go back. I'm all right. I've been wetter than this." "I don't doubt it, sir," said Whitlock, and he laid his sodden greatcoat over the old man's shoulders and chest, tucking the heavy wet wool down at the sides the way you tuck in something precious, and even soaked through it was warmer than the thin coat under it, and it cut the wind. "But you're not going to be wet a minute longer than I can help. Can you tell me your name?" "Alder," the old man said. "Tom Alder. There was a woman. She was meant to—" He stopped. Something moved behind his eyes, some understanding arriving, and he looked off down the empty lane toward the archway where she had gone, and the understanding settled, and he did not finish the sentence. He just said quietly, "She'll be back." She would not be back. We all three knew it, kneeling there in the rain, and not one of us said so. "Right now I'm taking you out of the wet," Whitlock said. "The colonnade's 20 yards. Sergeant Calloway's going to take your other side. Hold onto the chair, sir, not onto us. We'll do the holding." And he took the brake off with the side of his boot and stood, and took the handles of the wheelchair in his white gloves that were white no longer. That was the moment the marshal in the yellow coat reached us, breathless, his radio already in his hand. And behind him I could hear the first whistle from the colonnade, the duty corporal, who had seen 2 of his sentries walk off the line and was coming at the run to find out why his forecourt had emptied of guardsmen in the middle of a public watch. "You can't be off the rope," the marshal started. "This area's got to stay." "Then clear it," Whitlock said, not unkindly, not stopping, putting his shoulder into the chair to break the wheels free of the standing water. "Because I'm taking this man under cover, and you can walk with us, or you can get out of the way. But he is not sitting in this rain while we discuss it." I had never heard him string so many words together. 2 years on a post beside the man, and I think that was the longest speech I'd ever had from him. He said it the way he stood his brace, without heat, without apology, as a settled fact of the world, and the marshal, who had come to enforce a rule, found that he was instead holding the rope aside and waving us through the gap in it, because there are some certainties a yellow coat cannot argue with. So we went. Whitlock at the handles, me at Mr. Alder's right side with my hand hovering at his shoulder, the marshal hurrying ahead to clear a path that did not need clearing because the whole forecourt was watching us now in a silence you could feel through the noise of the rain. Phones were up. I saw them and I did not care. Let them film it, I thought. Let them film all of it. And from the direction of the colonnade growing louder, the duty corporal's whistle, and behind the whistle, the unmistakable bark of the garrison sergeant major's voice, who had been crossing the inner court when his forecourt fell apart, demanding to know which two of his men had abandoned the line. His name was Garrison Sergeant Major Doyle, and he was the most feared man at Hartmoor for the simple reason that he cared about the brace more than any of us, more than the officers, more than the king himself for all I knew. Doyle had stood that forecourt for 30 years before he ran it. He believed in the bone that the discipline was the whole of the thing, that a guardsman who would break for one good reason would break for 100 poor ones, and that the wall only holds if every stone in it holds without exception. He was not a cruel man. He was the opposite of a cruel man, but he was an absolute one, and absolutes have no door in them for an old man in a wheelchair. He came across the inner court at a pace that was somehow more frightening than a run, and he reached us under the lip of the colonnade just as we got Mr. Alder's chair up out of the rain and onto the dry stone, and he took one look at the scene, two of his sentries off post, one of them kneeling in a soaked greatcoatless tunic beside a civilian, the rifles slung and dripping, the public's phones all turned our way, and I watched his face go through the whole of it and land hard on Whitlock. Trooper Whitlock, very quiet. Doyle was always quietest when it was worst. You will explain to me in the next 5 seconds why you are not at your post. And here is the thing I will carry to my own grave about Bram Whitlock. He did not stand and brace and stammer. He did not let go of Mr. Alder to come to attention, though every reflex in him must have been hauling him upright at the sound of that voice. He kept his hand on the old man's shoulder, kept himself at the old man's level, and he turned only his head to look up at the garrison sergeant major, and he said, "Because he was left in the rain, sir, and no one else was going to take him out of it. That is not your job." "No, sir, it wasn't anyone's job. That's why he was still sitting in it." The whole colonnade had gone silent under the drumming of the rain on the stone above us. The duty corporal had stopped his whistle. The marshal was very interested in his radio. I stood at a kind of half-brace beside the chair, caught between the man I served under and the man I served beside, and I felt the whole weight of 30 years of Doyle's certainty bearing down on the 2 feet of dry stone where Whitlock knelt. Doyle looked at the old man then. He had not until that moment. He had been looking only at the breach, at the broken rule wearing his uniform. Now he looked at Mr. Alder, and Mr. Alder, who was still shaking under Whitlock's heavy wet coat, looked back up at the towering, furious sergeant major, and the old man said, in a voice gone thin and rattling but perfectly steady, "Don't be hard on the lad. He's the only one who came. I sat there a good while, Sergeant. I counted. I used to count, too, when I was waiting on men to do the right thing." He drew a slow breath that caught and rasped. "I waited a long time today. He's the one who came." "You used to count," Doyle repeated. 41 years I wore a uniform," Mr. Alder said. "Not your fine one, a working one, but I knew the rule about the line and I knew the rule about the man and I knew which one the king would rather you broke." He coughed, a deep wet sound that frightened me, and his hand tightened on Whitlock's forearm again. "I came to see the guard, you know, just the once. My granddaughter was meant to bring me. She had somewhere to be. She had somewhere to be." That was the kindest way I have ever heard a man name his own abandonment, and he gave it to the woman who had earned no kindness at all, and he gave it without bitterness, and I saw Doyle hear it. For a long moment the garrison sergeant major said nothing. The rain came down. Somewhere out on the forecourt a single sentry, the relief, sent out early, had taken up the empty south box, and the line was, after a fashion, restored, but no one was looking at the line. They were looking at the old soldier and the kneeling boy and the great granite sergeant major standing over them with his certainty cracking down the middle. 41 years, Doyle said at last. It was not a question. Logistics mostly, said Mr. Alder. Driving lorries through places I'd not recommend. Pulled a few lads out of a few ditches. Nothing your king ever heard about. A faint, failing smile. We don't all get the red coat. I have seen the garrison sergeant major dress down a colonel. I have seen him make a recruit cry on the parade square with 3 words and a look. I had never in 6 years seen him take his cap off indoors, which a man of his generation does only for 2 reasons, a church and the dead. He took it off now. He held it against his chest, the rain still running off the peak of it, and he looked down at Mr. Alder, and the absolute man found the door in himself after all. Trooper Whitlock, he said, you broke your post. Yes, sir. You'll do extra duties for it. A week. Yes, sir. Starting next week. Doyle crouched then slowly, the knees of a man who has braced for 30 years, and he came down level with the old man the way Whitlock had, the 2 of them framing Mr. Alder between the red wool and the dark. Because tonight, trooper, you are going to get this soldier warm and dry, and you are going to do it properly, and I am going to help you, and any man on this forecourt who has a problem with that can take it up with me on the square in the morning. He raised his voice, just slightly, and pitched it back toward the colonnade where the off-duty men had gathered. Is that understood? Yes, Sergeant Major, came the answer. A wall of it, and I will tell you the truth. There was a heat behind it, a relief, as though 40 men had been holding the same held breath I had been holding, and Doyle had just let them all let it out at once. What happened next happened fast, the way things do once a man like Doyle decides they will. He had the duty corporal double away for the medical post's wheeled stretcher and a stack of dry blankets. He had the marshal radio for the duty physician. He had 2 of the off-duty troopers bring out the big enamel mugs of hot sweet tea that lived on the boil in the guardroom for exactly the kind of cold a long winter watch put in a man's bones. And the first of those mugs went into Mr. Alder's shaking hands, with Whitlock's gloves cupped around the old man's to keep them from spilling it. And it was Doyle himself, the most feared man at Hartmore, who knelt on the wet stone and worked the soaked tartan blanket out from under the old soldier's legs and replaced it, fold by careful fold, with a dry one, the way you tend to a man, not a chair. We had him warm, we had him out of the rain. The thing that had been wrong on the forecourt for 13 long minutes was being put right in front of 200 witnesses and a forest of phones, and I thought, foolishly, that the hard part was over. It was not, because that was the moment the woman came back. She came in under the colonnade out of the rain with her phone still in her hand and an umbrella she had found somewhere from somewhere dry, and she took in the scene, the stretcher being wheeled up, the blankets, the sergeant major on one knee, the ring of guardsmen, the old man with a mug of tea and a soaked red greatcoat over his shoulders, and the first thing out of her mouth, I swear it on my service, was not his name. "What is going on?" she said. "What have you done? You can't just," she rounded on Whitlock, "on the nearest uniform, because that is the reflex of a certain kind of person, to find the official to blame. Did you move him? You can't move a vulnerable adult without a carer present. That's, I'm his carer, I'm responsible for him. You have no right." "You're his carer," said Doyle, and he rose to his full height, and the cap came back onto his head, and the door in him closed again, but this time it was not closing on the old man. "I'm his registered carer, yes, and I left him for 2 minutes to take an important call about his own arrangements, and I come back to find." 11 minutes. It was Whitlock he had not stood. He was still at the old man's side, his hand still where Mr. Alder could feel it, and he said the number flatly without looking at her. "You left him at the rope at 14 minutes past the hour. I came off my post at 25 past. He was in the rain 11 minutes before anyone reached him, and you were gone the whole of it. I watched you go. So did he. I don't know who you think you are." I'm the man who took your soldier out of the rain, Whitlock said, while you took a call. I have to be careful here about what I tell you because I will not make her a cartoon. She was not a monster. I have thought about it a great deal, and I believe she was something more ordinary and more dangerous than a monster. She was a person who had stopped seeing the man in the chair as a man. He had become a task to her, a set of arrangements, a thing to be parked and managed and rescented. And once a person becomes a task, it is the smallest step in the world to leave the task in the rain because something more interesting is ringing on your phone. She had not set out to be cruel. She had simply, somewhere along the way, stopped counting him as someone who could be cold. And the proof of it was this. In all her talk of rights and rules and registers and 2-minute calls, she had not once, not one single time, asked the old man how he was. Doyle noticed it the same instant I did. I saw him notice it. And he did the thing that I think, of everything that happened that day, told me most about why men would follow that hard old man into anything. Mr. Alder, Doyle said, turning his back fully on the woman, giving her the parade ground cut direct, addressing only the soldier in the chair. Are you warm enough, sir? Is there anything you need? I'm grand, said the old man, and his teeth had stopped going, and there was a little color back in him now, and the mug was steady in his hands. Best cup of tea I've had in a year. His eyes moved to the woman and stayed on her, and something passed over his face that was not anger, it was sadder than anger. It was the particular tiredness of a man cataloging a disappointment he has cataloged before. Marguerite, you said 2 minutes. Tom, I had to take the... You said 2 minutes, he said again gently, and then it rained and I sat, and I want you to know I'm not cross. I've sat through worse rain than that with men I'd have died for, and not one of them ever left me at a rope. So I'm not cross. I think I'd like to go home with someone else now, if that can be arranged. It was the quietest thing said on that forecourt all day, and it landed like a verdict. The physician arrived then, a brisk, calm woman who knelt and took the old man's pulse and listened to his chest, and said low and serious that he was chilled through and needed to be seen properly, that there was a rattle she didn't like. And within minutes Mr. Alder was being eased onto the wheeled stretcher under a foil blanket and a real one, still holding his tea, insisting he could walk and being kindly overruled. And it was at the edge of all that controlled bustle that the real reckoning happened, off to one side, between Doyle and the woman, and I was close enough to hear it because Doyle wanted me close enough to hear it. He told me afterward he'd kept me there on purpose. A witness, he said. Always have a witness. You're a paid carer, Doyle said to her, quiet again. Registered, you said, which means there's an agency and an agreement and a duty of care and a record. You left a frail man in a wheelchair in the open in heavy rain for 11 minutes while you took a call, and you've not yet asked him if he's all right. I want the name of your agency. You can't. I can ask, you can decline. And then I'll get it another way, because that man came through my gate today and was failed in front of my house, and I do not let that go unaddressed. He produced, from somewhere about that immaculate uniform, a small notebook and a stub of pencil, the same that I imagine had taken down the sins of recruits for 30 years. The duty office has the whole of it on camera from 4 angles, time-stamped. 200 members of the public have it on their phones. The marshal logged it. So this is not a question of whether it happened. It's only a question of whether you'd rather your account of it sat next to the footage, or didn't. She gave him the name of the agency. Of course she did. And Doyle wrote it down in his small, slow hand, and the marshal gave a statement, and the duty office pulled the footage, and the physician noted the old man's condition for the record, and none of it was done in heat. None of it was a guard losing his temper and shouting a woman down for the cameras. It was done the way Hartmore does everything that matters, quietly, thoroughly, on the record, the way a wall holds. I learned later what came of it, and I'll tell you, because the question every man watching this wants answered is whether she got away with it. She did not. The agency, faced with the footage and the marshal's log and a frail client's chest infection that put him 3 nights in a hospital, did the thing such agencies do when there is no defending the indefensible. She was let go. Her registration was reported to the body that holds such registrations, and Mr. Alder was assigned a new carer, a former medic named Foss who, I am told, has never once in 2 years let the old man sit anywhere he did not want to sit. But that came later. On the day, all I knew was that they were wheeling Tom Alder away to the warm and the dry, and that as they took him under the arch toward the medical post, he raised one hand off the foil blanket and beckoned, and it was not Doyle he beckoned, and it was not me. "The lad," he said. "Where's the lad?" Bram, he had got the name, I never learned how. Whitlock must have told him, kneeling in the rain. "Bram, come here a minute." Whitlock went to him. The stretcher crew paused, and the old soldier reached up and took the young guardsman by the front of his ruined tunic, the white gloves long since gone gray, the red wool dark with rain, the medals he had not yet earned in any number to match the ones Mr. Alder had left in a drawer at home, and he pulled him down close, and he said something to him that I did not hear, and Whitlock's still face, the statue's face, the face I had watched a pigeon sit on, broke at last. It was not a large thing. He did not weep. A man like that does not weep on a forecourt in front of 200 phones. But his jaw moved, and his eyes filled and held, and he closed them for a moment and pressed the old man's hand against his chest with his own. And when he opened them again, something had passed between those two men that the rest of us were only allowed to witness from outside, the way you witness a thing through a window. I asked him much later, weeks later, the two of us back on the same two-man post on a dry, bright morning with the brace held and the tourists snapping away, what the old man had said to him. Whitlock was quiet for a long time. Then he told me, eyes front, in that flat, level voice. He said, "I didn't think anyone was coming." Whitlock paused. The rifle did not move. And then he said, "Don't you ever let anyone tell you that standing still is the same as standing for something. You stood up. Remember the difference." We held the brace a while after that, the way you do. I should finish the parts you'll want finished. Mr. Alder recovered. The chest infection was a near thing for a man his age, but Foss the medic got him through it, and the following spring, and this is the part I love best, he came back to Hartmoor, not parked at a rope this time. He came as a guest of the garrison sergeant major, by name on the books, with a place out of the weather and a chair that someone had actually thought about, and he watched the changing of the guard from under the colonnade with a mug of the guardroom's sweet tea going cold in his hands because he was too busy watching to drink it. Doyle stood beside him the whole of it, the two old soldiers not saying much, in the way of old soldiers, the red coat and the man who never got one, side by side at last. And Whitlock did his week of extra duties without complaint, and Doyle made sure every recruit at Hartmoor heard the why of it, told straight, that a guardsman broke his post and was disciplined for it and was right to do it, and that both of those things were true at once, and a real soldier learns to hold them both. That is not a contradiction the parade square likes. But Doyle made them hold it anyway, because he had held it himself, kneeling in the rain with his cap against his chest, and a man teaches best the lesson that cost him something. People ask me when this gets told, whether the discipline didn't lose something that day, whether the wall didn't crack. I have thought about it more than I've thought about almost anything, standing my long, quiet hours on that forecourt since, and here is the answer I've come to, and it is the only thing in this whole account I'll ask you to carry away. The wall did not crack. The wall is what walked across that forecourt in the rain. We tell ourselves the discipline is the stillness, the held brace, the eyes front, the not moving, and the stillness is most of it most days, and it is a true and a hard and an honorable thing, but the stillness was never the point. The stillness is only the discipline at rest. The discipline itself is the thing underneath, the thing that decides, in the half-second when a rule and a man collide, which of the two you were truly trained to serve. A guardsman who has spent 6 years teaching his body not to move for a heckler has not been learning to be a statue. He has been learning to be utterly, immovably in command of himself, so that on the one day in 1,000 when moving is the only honorable thing left, he can do it cleanly, completely, without panic and without doubt, and answer for it afterward with his chin level and his voice flat, and not one word of apology for the man he chose. That is what Whitlock did. He did not break the discipline, he spent it. He had been saving it up, a little every hour for 2 years, in every taunt he swallowed and every drop of rain he let run down his collar, and on a gray afternoon he took the whole of that hoarded stillness, and he laid it down on the wet cobbles on one knee beside a forgotten old soldier, and he said, with his whole trained and disciplined body, "You are not going to be alone in this another minute." No soldier of that house was ever drilled to do a finer thing. I stand the Eastgate forecourt still. The standing orders have not changed. There is still no procedure for an old man left in the rain. There does not need to be. We had one all along, and it was never written down, and it is the oldest one there is, older than Hartmore, older than the Crown, and it goes like this. You do not leave a man in the rain. Not a comrade, not a stranger, not anyone. You hold your post for years so that on the day it matters you have the strength to leave it for exactly the right reason and not one wrong one, and then you go, and you kneel, and you take him out of the weather, and you let the world film it if the world wants to, and you answer for it like a soldier. I was the second man across that forecourt. I will be the first one next time. Bram Whitlock taught me that, and Tom Alder taught it to him, and somewhere a long way back some sergeant taught it to Tom Alder in a working uniform on a road I'll never see. And that is the only chain of command that has ever truly mattered to me. Don't ever let anyone tell you that standing still is the same as standing for something. Stand up, remember the difference.